robots may not look like what we're used to seeing them. We have
Mm.
this viewpoint of robots that look sort of like people walking down the street, examples that seem still like for many of us are in the vein of science fiction. But in other areas, it's really exploding.
From AgriPoints, I'm James Kotecki, and this is Intelligent Everywhere. My guest today is Bobby Samuels, the CEO of Protege, and we are talking robots, specifically robots moving out of controlled environments and into human spaces. Bobby, welcome to the show. What does that mean? Why is that exciting?
James, thanks for having me. It's great to meet you. Great to be here. Today, robots have really, to your point, only been operating in very specific constrained settings and factories and things like that. But over the next few years, that's going to change dramatically. And robots really will begin interacting with us in a more day-to-day way. We think that's going to open up some really incredible things for all of us.
What is a robot, and what is Protege's role in the robot ecosystem?
A robot is something that mimics a human activity in the real world in an automated fashion. Where we focus on really is the data component of all of this. And so you will need huge amounts of data on human motion, on motion around the world to capture and create these foundational multimodal training data sets that will enable robotics to flourish and take off in the ways that we think it can. We think there are tons of really interesting use cases and ways that robotics can change our day-to-day life and make us more efficient, healthier, happier, et cetera. And we think robotics is a key way to making that happen.
So a robot is an entity that is doing a human type activity in the real world, but in an automated way. But robots need a lot of training data on human activities to be able to get better at doing them. And that's where Protege comes in with that data.
Exactly. That's exactly our focus.
When we talk about robots moving into like the quote unquote real world, does that mean that regular people are going to actually start seeing them more?
Yeah, I think so. Robots may not look like what we're used to seeing them. We have
Mm.
this viewpoint of robots that look sort of like people walking down the street. I would argue Waymo is a robot. And if you go to the streets of San Francisco, they are everywhere. Waymo's expanding to other cities. It is changing the way people are living in those cities, and that is happening very rapidly. So I do think, yes, there are the examples that seem still like for many of us are in the vein of science fiction, but in other areas, it's really exploding. I think our ability to, and this is where we live, take data from the real world and be able to more holistically gather it, use it as a way to model the real world, and then enable it to train robots. We think that's going to unlock a huge wave of innovation.
I understand that you have data, you collect data, you process data about all sorts of human activities. Can you tell me about some of the more idiosyncratic ones, or maybe some of the more interesting human activities that you have data for?
Our first foray into robotics has been around motion capture. We have a big presence in Hollywood and media, and so that neatly maps onto motion capture technology. If you think about it, motion capture is you have tons of sensors all over the human body, and it's usually used for some sort of avatar in a movie. But it also is an incredible approximation for how a person, or soon to be how a robot, could move through the natural environment. And there are a lot of different cases of data like that can exist that are created for one context that can be mapped neatly over to something like robotics and can help ultimately create a better and safer robot.
What kind of use cases then is your training most helpful for enabling? What will robots, or maybe what can robots do that your training data is helping with?
I will caveat, we're sort of the whole space is in the early days of robotics and training data and all of this. But some of the use cases that we think about and are building towards, one is healthcare, our initial focus area. There's so much that happens within healthcare that can be aided by robotics That's even more important with the fact that we have a massive nursing shortage in the country. We're facing a significant shortage with doctors as well. And so whether that's things like rehab assistance or surgical robotics or automating hospital logistics, those are all things that robots can help with. We also think that agriculture is a really interesting area. So you can have robots that can mimic the sort of pull and twist of bringing up strawberry off of a tree. And one of our team members actually grew up on a farm. And so we've talked about this. But there are all these things today that are done by humans. And if we're able to bring the right robots and help train them, can give us a lot more time and leverage, especially in certain areas where we're in desperate need of more talent.
And you mentioned that it's still early days. What are the biggest challenges right now? Is it just getting more and more data and using that data appropriately? Are there things with the actual mechanism, the physical robot mechanism itself that need to improve? Like, what's standing between us and a glorious future where all of our harvest labor problems are solved because we can just send the robots out to just get it all done tomorrow?
It's probably both a data problem, but also robotics is both more complicated, but also has higher sort of risk thresholds associated. If you look at the self-driving cars example again, they've been safer than human-driven cars for a long time, but there has been hesitance to bring them into the real world because of the safety implications. My guess is we will get to a point in the not so distant future where the main limitation of implementing robots in the real world will be the safety concerns that we have. Right now, I'd say it's a combination of technology and data because it's hard data to gather. And it's data that folks haven't really thought about before. And I'd say we're really probably at the forefront of thinking through and starting to gather what is data that exists in the real world today that we can help bring in, we can help curate, and then ultimately help empower others to train their models.
So, what does it mean for me as a human being whose motion was used in a robot training set? Do I have any kind of rights? Are there any kind of intellectual property implications for that? I'm thinking about analogies to LLMs, where of course there's tons of controversy with publishers, with authors about how that content was used and pulled in and trained on, and who should be compensated and who owns what. And so, I'm just curious if you see that analogy in your world.
Yes, we focus on a number of different verticals, many of which touch on uh, some sort of intellectual property. Pretty much all do. And we focus on what's called ethical sourcing. So every data set that we work with, we have to feel confident that it was obtained in a way that's consistent with intellectual property law, that ultimately the licensing ensures that the holders of that data are being adequately compensated. In a healthcare context, it means de-identifying the data. And we go beyond what regulations have suggested. There are times where there's not a piece that is regulated and we decide not to work with it because we're not comfortable with certain components of it.
What's the most exciting robot display or demonstration that you've seen recently?
I've now been in half a dozen Waymos, and every time it's incredible. Both the technology is incredible, but also, and this speaks to human nature, I think, you get in for a few minutes, you're wowed, and then you just live your life. And it's just part of the fabric of how you live your life. That is true of technology. And I think that will be true of robotics, where they become an integrated part of what we do and just make our lives easier and enable us to focus on other things.
Well, Bobby Samuels, CEO of Protege, thank you so much for joining us today on Intelligent Everywhere.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed the conversation.
And thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, do whatever it takes to let the algorithms know that you want more Intelligent Everywhere. And that'll make me happy too. From AgriPoint, I'm James Kotecki. This is Intelligent Everywhere. Let's get out there.